Okay. I wanted to talk today about the concept of purification in meditation. Many people think of meditation as primarily a process of purification. It's not something I personally talk about that often because it has a slightly judgmental tone in English. That is, if you're purifying yourself, that means you're full of bad stuff that needs to be gotten rid of. And although, of course, there's a sense in which that's true. We all have ways we can improve and be purified. There is something in that is contrary to the essence of meditation, which is a practice of accepting the way things are. And in fact, to really get the purification out of meditation, you have to experience that quality of acceptance. So I just want to state that at the beginning as I talk about purification here, to really purify through meditation means to drop your judgments and drop your idea about what is bad and good in you, what needs to be eliminated, what needs to be gotten rid of, what needs to be rooted out, what needs to be cleansed. In order to really purify, you need to drop the judgmental aspect of purification. And that's why I don't usually talk about it, but it's a big part of meditation. One of my teachers, Shinzen Young, it's a thing he talks about quite a bit. So it's an important part of the lineage, that one of the lineages I consider myself part of. And it's a really useful concept to have when you're going through difficult times, because we purify, we have a more intense experience of purification when we are going through difficulty. The process that helps purify us in meditation, that causes purification, is the process of experiencing our life with equanimity. And the sort of bigger and more intense experience that we have, that can force us into equanimity, the more purification that can happen. Now, just your daily paying attention to your breath with equanimity is causing purification. And we're going to talk about what this means. But the truth is, there's a bigger space of equanimity that needs to be achieved if you're going through really difficult things. And if you're capable of expanding your equanimity, sort of creating a wider sense of acceptance during those periods of difficulty, then you can go through intense bursts of purification. You can go through healing in very short periods of time. So I think maybe what I'll do is explore different metaphors for purification and talk about how, give that as a way of thinking about how meditation is working on us. So the first thing that comes to mind is I have a kind of Brita filter in my house, or any kind of filter you have in your house, is a kind of purification, right? It's purifying the water. And it does that by filtering the water. So the water moves through the filter, and you can have greater or lesser, more intense or less intense types of filtration. And as the water goes through, the impurities, the toxins, the things you don't want, are pulled from the water. Only the water gets through. Only the water is able to get through the density of the filtration system. Some filters have one layer with one type of mesh or property. Some require the water to go through a whole bunch of, like a maze-like thing, to pull out the impurities. This is the kind of first metaphor that pops into mind for me for the notion of purification. It makes sense when we talk about water or something, like what we're purifying. We're getting rid of toxins and poisons. What does it mean in meditation? Well, it's actually not that different from many other psychological or semi-spiritual paths that people might be on. You know, in psychotherapy, you might think of what we're doing as, you know, unwinding or healing wounds or patterns that got sort of put in us when we were children. Right. So the idea, the sort of the psychotherapeutic idea is that as we're becoming adults, there's a whole set of patterns of wounds and behaviors and memories and ways of relating that get input into us. And many of those are unhealthy or neurotic, or you might call it, you have a complex, right? Would be a psychotherapeutic term for that, a neuroses. We talk a lot about trauma now. So trauma would be a more extreme version of something a pattern that gets put into us when we're young. So psychotherapy is an attempt to, through talking, to unwind and purify the psychology of those complexes. And in many ways, the Buddhism, the Hinduism, the world of meditation is doing a similar thing. If you want to think of Christianity, they would be talking probably more about sin. And this is not the modality I talk in, but it's a very widely understood one. And I think many of us even carry it around, even if we're not Christian, because it's part of our culture. The idea that there's a sinful nature that we have, you know, the 7 deadly sins types of habits and patterns to be greedy or lustful, or, again, I'm not judging anything in particular here or adopting this Christian point of view, but just so you understand, in our culture, this is another way we think of purification. The saints, Christian saints, are purified because they have purified them of their sinful nature, themselves, of their sinful nature. And Buddhism and Hinduism, I think it's Sanskrit, the Sanskrit word, and Sanskrit is really the language that underlies a lot of Hinduism and Buddhism. The Sanskrit word was samskara, which is like I like to think of it as a knot. I think you also can think of it as a groove. So let's think about those two ideas. If through our childhood, our relationship with our mother or father, say, we develop a kind of pattern of behavior. Say our mother is a little bit avoidant and doesn't give us a lot of affection. So we're constantly trying to get their affection. We're constantly behaving in ways to paying attention and hoping that we can get attention and get love. And we do that over and over again. So we create a groove in our nervous system in our relationship with, say, women, or at least women like our mother. And that groove then plays out as we become a teenager and as we become an adult, as we move into romantic relationships. But this would be a psychotherapeutic understanding, but this is also a samskara. This is a groove in our unconscious, in our subconscious, that patterns how we actually live our lives, how we both see the world, how we interpret other people. In this case, women that might remind us of our mother, or anyone else that might remind us of our mother, and also how we act with respect to other people. You also think of it as a knot, and I often do think of it this way. It's as if we were born with free-floating strings of our nature, and those strings could vibrate freely however they wanted to. I'm always, we just come in and we're a baby. We're willing to just do whatever feels natural. We move our arms in all these crazy ways, and right when we're learning how to do everything, We don't mind falling. We don't mind bumping into things. We're free. We're free. Our behavior is free. We'll respond to a new thing and however it comes across. I remember I have an uncle that had a big beard, and he always tells me the first time I saw him when I was like 3, he came in and I just started wailing. I was crying. The beard scared me. We'll giggle at things, right? As we pattern ourselves as human beings, which is necessary to be a human being, we start to tie these strings, these free strings that can vibrate, into knots. And they become less free and they become more knotted, and the sense of freedom becomes restricted. These are samskaras. Samskaras are history. And in the Buddhist and Hindu, again, I am neither a Buddhist nor a Hindu, but in these traditions, these are samskaras not just from this lifetime, but past lifetimes. And you can think of that, if you want to just keep it within our Western kind of mythology, that is also our biology, right? Our genetics. There's certain patterns that are put into us just as being human, but also maybe by our family genetics, our parents' genetics. And so just like in psychotherapy, or any of the trauma therapies we go through, or even yoga or Christianity, there's a sense of purification to improve our lives. We want to drop the stuff that is hindering us, that is poisoning us. We want to purify it. Meditation is essentially a purification process. And it's arguable it's the most efficient purification process. That's not always going to be true in practice, and I'll talk about why. But in theory, it's the most efficient purification practice because that's all it's doing. So let's start with this idea of the water filtering through my Brita. I haven't thought about this until now, so we'll see how it goes. But there's a sense of when our normal everyday life goes along, say again, I have a pattern of reacting to women. They cause me anxiety or something, right? You have a hook. When you get on a plane, you're scared, right? Or you have a trauma from your childhood. So loud noises cause a whole pattern in you. Or it just annoys you to no end when somebody won't clean the spoons, right? There's just a number of patterns we have, right? That are in our bodies. And the way that normally plays out in our life is the trigger event happens. It can be we talk about triggering only with trauma, but it's throughout our life. Our whole day long, we're triggered to do things. Our day is mostly habit. That's not necessarily bad, because those habits were put into us because they're practical and useful. But we want to be conscious of them. So say I'm going along and the spoon is not clean, and I start getting annoyed. And the normal way we go through this is we just play out the pattern. The spoon is not clean, so I immediately have feelings of of annoyance. And whatever those feelings are in, maybe my childhood, my family, it was not a well-maintained space. Maybe my family environment did not feel totally safe. Maybe there was a fair amount of dysfunction, and that also manifested in kind of dirtiness and uncleanliness. So maybe it really starts to make me feel unsafe. But that's not the first emotion I'll feel. I'll feel annoyance at the person who did not clean the spoon. Underneath that might be a sense of that person doesn't really care about me because they know I want to clean the spoon. And then maybe underneath that sense of that person doesn't really care about me, which again, a child might feel, right? I know I'm supposed to be taken care of better. Underneath that sense of not lack of respect, maybe a sense of loneliness. Maybe fear is above that, like a sense of insecurity. Right? And then underneath that would be a sense of loneliness, sadness. We don't have to play this all out, but there's a sort of pattern that's built up in our life with all these layers. Most of what we do is live on the surface layer. The spoon is not clean. I feel annoyance. That immediately generates certain thoughts. Why do they do this? I always say this. I always want them to clean the spoons. They don't, it doesn't take that long to clean a spoon. Right? Nobody cares. My man. We tie it in other aspects of our life, and we are often running. We're making the groove deeper. We're tightening the knot of the samskara. One way to think about what this is in terms of the Brita filter, we're bringing the toxin with us through the filter. We're carrying it through the filter. We're holding onto it so tight that it comes with us into the next moment. This is a thing from the past, and we keep carrying it with us. One way of thinking about this is a stream, a mountain stream. It's a version of a Brita filter. I don't totally understand the science, so don't hold me to this. But there's a sense, of course, that there are things that get thrown into a stream, but as the water just keeps going down the mountain, eventually those things drop to the floor of the stream, or they get hit, and they bump into a rock and get stuck on the bank. And the water, the pure water, just keeps going. What we do is we carry with us these samskaras, these poisons, these toxins, these things that cause us suffering, moment to moment. They carry through us. And when we try to put a filter on, say, I don't want this anymore, right? We can sense, I wish I didn't react this badly to this. It's affecting my relationships. When we try to let go of them, put the filter on, you say, okay, I'm going to put this filter on. It doesn't work because the second the trigger happens, we grab onto it again and we pull the toxin through the filter into the next moment. We carry it down the river with us. So what is meditation? When meditation, we're practicing, I like to talk about acceptance. In Buddhism, the term is usually called equanimity. We're practicing not grabbing on. So the trigger happens, I see the spoon, and now I'm mindful. I experience the dirtiness of the spoon on its own. Oh, the spoon is slightly dirty, right? Then I experience my reaction. I experience the feelings in my body that I may have never noticed before. Oh, I get tight in my belly, my chest gets hot. And then I notice the thoughts that start wanting to run. And I don't get involved in them. I experience them with equanimity. I experience them with acceptance. Not the acceptance to say the spoon is good or my feelings are good. The acceptance that says, this is what's here. I don't need to add to it. So in the metaphor of not pulling the toxin with us into the next moment, by practicing equanimity, we are not pulling that samskara with us into the next moment. We're starting to unwind the knot of the threads, to mix many metaphors. What would it feel like to allow the present moment, that's really what is happening, the present moment to purify you of your past? The present moment to purify you of your past. The present moment becomes the filter, the purification so that you can move into the future, the next moment, without carrying all the knots, the baggage, the toxins, poison, the memories, the history, the karma, the samskaras. What we're practicing in meditation, by say, focusing on my breath, I'm just staying on my breath. A trigger happens. Usually when we're on the cushion, it's going to be a trigger in our mind, but not necessarily. There might be a dog barking, or your partner might be being noisy, or there might be a pain in your body. Or most likely it's going to be a memory or a thought about the future. We practice in this very contained and safe experience where the triggers should generally be small. They can get very big, but they will generally be small. So we're practicing with very small triggers at first. I'm focusing on my breath, say, lots of other meditations to do, but practicing focusing on my breath, maybe. The trigger happens and I stay equanimous, and I let it arise and I let it pass away. And I'm practicing letting the present moment filter my past out. And just as with a Brita, you might need to pass things through a filter many, many times. And that is absolutely true. If you've got a deep groove in your mind, it's going to take a while for that groove to get washed away. And that's why we sit. That's why we start practicing our mindfulness in our everyday life. Every time we are present for a moment, actually present, actually have some equanimity or have some concentration even. In the words of my teacher, Shinzen Young, it would be equanimity, clarity, or concentration. For me, it's acceptance, concentration. These words are just words to try and describe the type of thing that happens in here that we're practicing. If that happens for a second, purification is happening. You may not even know what it is purifying. But instead of getting involved in something in your subconscious, unconscious, you are allowing it to arise and pass away. I do like to think along the metaphor of knots. I like to think of it as like massage. All these knots in my back, right? I got knots in my neck and got knots in my thighs or whatever. And when you get a masseuse, they come in there and they push on those knots. And you know that you go to a masseuse and sometimes, not always, but sometimes they will massage something. I would just, oh my God, that released and it's just gone. And sometimes you need to go back to the massage quite often to get it massaged out. But meditation is a kind of massage in this sense. The mechanism of the groove is, it's actually almost like training an animal. When the spoon is dirty, keep talking about spoons. It's not my obsession, but the spoon is dirty, it triggers the pattern. If you actually get anxious or irritated and angry, and then have all the thoughts, and then get involved in the story of the spoon and how your partner is not respecting you, as I said, you're making the groove go deeper. But why does it make it go deeper? Well, partly it's because you're replaying it, right? You're just replaying over the same groove. But there's actually a kind of reward system here. The trigger comes up and the body goes, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do when people don't clean the spoons. I'm supposed to get angry and I'm supposed to get anxious and I'm supposed to try and solve this problem. That makes me safe, the body thinks. And so in that sense, the body thinks that makes me happy. This is the weird thing about every groove we have. There's a sense in that groove that this is the way to stay safe and happy. Your body thinks getting mad about the spoons will keep you safe. Right? That makes sense. As we said in this story, in your childhood, it wasn't safe. And your body associated that with the lack of cleanliness. So the body tried to think about, well, how do I make myself safe? Well, what if I keep my life ordered and clean? And I live with people who respect that order and cleanliness. Then I will be safe. So the spoon is dirty, and then the groove is replayed, but it also is rewarded in the sense, because you're essentially telling it, yes, thank you for warning me about that spoon. This is clearly important to me. I need to think about it. Thank you for keeping me safe. There's some pleasure in that. Now, you have to pay quite a bit of attention for most people to notice that, but there is pleasure in getting annoyed and getting righteous when you feel essentially lonely and unsafe. Getting angry, annoyed, and righteous makes you feel a little safer because you're on top of the problem. So it's just like an animal. If every time your dog barks, you give it attention, it's going to bark more. This is a classic example of animal training, right? If your dog barks and you don't want them to bark, and you're like, no, don't do that. You got two options. You can try to punish the dog, or you can just yell at the dog, but the dog kind of wants the attention. So what is the recommended way to train that dog? When it barks, don't give it the attention. It will then learn that the barking is not doing what it thinks it's doing. It's not getting rewarded by the owner with attention. And it will cease barking. And then you could also go the other side and give it a little reward when it's quiet. So when there's a noise outside that it might bark at, you get it to look at you and you give it a treat before it barks, right? So there's a little quick animal training, but we do the same thing to ourselves. The spoon is dirty, and I start barking inside, but instead of giving that attention in the sense of getting caught up in it, giving it a reaction, we stay in equanimity. We stay in clarity with what's happening. We stay in acceptance. This is what's happening in my body. This is what's happening in my mind. And that's what's happening in the external world. That's just what's happening. We do that, and we are retraining that samskara. I really am mixing metaphors here, but I'm going to go back to the idea of the masseuse. So that metaphor can sort of stand on its own, but the concentration we're practicing when we meditate is like the masseuse kind of pressing on the samskara. There's a kind of, I'm trying to feel my way through this. There's you really can sense the energies when you're starting to meditate. When you're starting to get good at meditation, when you're starting to get the effects and the benefits of meditation. Actually, Shinzen would call this, you would start to notice the taste of purification. Really important part of practice is when you start noticing that your meditation practice is releasing these poisons. Because when you start noticing that that's happening in the moment, you're getting a reward. So you now have a motivation to keep going. But at first, when you're sitting, people, constant, how many times have I heard, I can't meditate? And from someone who's meditated for a while, your first reaction inside is kind of like, even though I've heard it 1,000 times, is, what do you mean you can't meditate? All you got to do is sit there. What they really mean is, I can't sit there. A fairly well-known study showed that people can't sit in a room by themselves with nothing to do. It's incredibly uncomfortable. How did they prove this? Well, they said, here, you're in a room, there's nothing else, there's just this table, and there's this machine which will shock you. I'm going to give you a shock to show you how painful it is. See, that's painful. And they would go, yo, that's really does not feel good, right? Shock does not feel good. But you put them in a room for 30 minutes and there's nothing else they can do except shock themselves. They could sit silently and quiet and just wait, or shock themselves. And what do? They shock themselves. Because there's nothing else to play out their samskaras, their grooves with. And those samskaras are ready to go. And we want to be on one of them because, as I said, it makes us feel safe to be in our grooves. So what's happening? It's uncomfortable to just sit there. And that is what people mean when they say, I can't meditate. It's uncomfortable at first to just meditate. Now, very quickly, especially if you're guided well, you can get some comfortable experiences meditating, but there are also just an intrinsic discomfort in not doing the things you normally do. And why is that? Well, you're bumping up against your triggers. I need to be making myself safe. I need to be solving my problems. I need to be reliving and healing things immediately, right now. That's a subconscious thing that's in almost all of us, if not all of us. So to just focus on my breath is very uncomfortable because I have a habit of attention to be looking around for my triggers, to be looking for dirty spoons. So when I concentrate on just my breath, I'm starting to put pressure on all of those samskaras. And I'm putting pressure on that basic samskara, which is a habit of attention to be looking constantly for fear, for things we desire. Putting pressure on that knot. And we start to unwind that restriction in our mental space. It can be very useful just to think of things. Take one of these metaphors and start thinking about them in this way. I am concentrating on my breath. As I'm doing it, I am like a masseuse rubbing out knots in my psychology, soul, however you want to put it, right? Knots in my behavioral system. And just like with a knot in your behavioral system, it might not feel good when you're pressing against that. And you may not even understand, especially if there's a masseuse up there, what they're doing or where or exactly what they're working on or why the knot is there. But something's happening. If you're concentrating, if you are accepting, if you're in equanimity with that discomfort, I'm going to just, have you heard a masseuse tell you to breathe in and breathe out to release as I'm pressing on this? You don't want to tighten up against the pain that's being caused by the pressure. You want to relax into it, which causes relaxation, which allows that knot to release. Same thing in meditation. We sit there in equanimity. That's what we're practicing. And that equanimity, that acceptance, the concentration is creating the conditions for release of those knots. To go to all the metaphors, it's filtering out the toxins of our past through the present moment. I can think of another 4 or 5 metaphors for this purification, which could be useful another time, but not today. What I want to talk about to finish up here, though, is pain and discomfort. So let me reiterate what Shinzen says about the taste of purification. It's not his. I mean, he's getting this from other places, but what we want to start to develop is the starting to be aware that that's happening. And you can start, you can't force this, but as you sit long enough and you practice equanimity more and more, you'll start to be able to sense things releasing. Sometimes, just as with therapy, just as with a masseuse, you know something just released. You even know what it is. You might have an insight and it just releases in meditation. That totally happens. You'll suddenly realize why you have such a problem with spoons. But many times, most of the time, the things are releasing underneath the level of your consciousness. And there have been things in my life, patterns in my life, that I didn't even know I was working on that just disappeared through meditation. I just noticed one day, wow, I don't do that anymore. I'm not interested in that. A very trivial one comes to mind. There was just one day I couldn't watch NFL football anymore. I'm not judging anyone who's watching NFL football, but I just noticed a kind of revulsion at the pain, the suffering, the physical pain that people were going through. And I didn't think it out logically. I'm not telling you philosophically no one should play football. That wasn't even what it was. It was just, oh, I no longer enjoy this. Some habit from my past to change. Very trivial, but things like that. Habits and patterns will change. Suddenly it no longer bothers me when someone's spoon is not clean. And maybe I should think of a better example from my life. I mean, much of it really has to do with like political ideas, and I have similar political beliefs to ones I always had before. But but they don't trigger me, right? As much, I should say. They've largely been purified. What does that look like? That means I'm now capable of having a conversation with someone I disagree with. I'm capable of respecting and loving somebody who might have a different view than I do. I'm capable of hearing what they might have to say. Very useful. Anyways, you start to get this taste of purification in meditation. And you get it because you've seen some big releases happen, but you've also started to just feel the purification happening. You just feel yourself being cleansed, made more free. What this means, and this can be a little dangerous if you take it with your mind and you don't follow your experience of the taste of purification. So I want to make sure that I'm not telling you to do a thing. I'm going to tell you what happens when you experience a thing. When you start to experience the taste of purification, you also start to lean into the difficult parts in your nature and the difficult experiences in your life. Rather than avoiding them, avoiding the difficult feelings, and avoiding the difficult experiences, you start to have a tendency to lean into them. Now, I want to repeat, that can be dangerous if you think I'm telling you you have to lean into those. It is a way to proceed, and some of you just will, by your nature, proceed that way. But you can force yourself into things you're not ready for if you're letting your mind guide you. But if you start to taste the sense of purification, you'll start to, pleasure is not the right word, there's a kind of sense of, there's a reward in it. There's a reward in the purification happening. You feel more free, more awake. And that will mean you'll start leaning into more difficult experiences. The best times in my life, honestly, and this will sound, I don't know how this will sound, but the best times in my life have been on retreat, on meditation retreat. And for most of us, meditation retreats would be a form of torture. I told you, putting a person in a room for 30 minutes clearly is somewhat torture, because they will end up torturing themselves rather than just sit there doing nothing. And the meditation retreat, say for 10 days of silence, is being put in a room for 10 days with nothing to do, not allowed to do anything, not allowed to talk to anybody, not allowed to read a book. And those have been the best times of my life. There are other good times. Those are among the very best times of my life. Because once you get the taste of purification, you're getting rewarded. You can feel yourself cleansing of all the things that cause you suffering. So that will lead people to do things like retreats. And all the traditions, Christian, Buddhism, Hinduism, all the traditions, including secular non-religious traditions, just like athletics, when you start to get a taste for purification, you might start leaning into more and more difficult experiences, like sitting for 14 hours a day in a meditation retreat, or the traditions in, Zen Buddhism, where you have to be isolated for 100 days or something. I think there's one where I think I read in Shinzen's book that you had to be, they had one tradition where you had to be isolated for 12 years and do a whole bunch of walking and chanting, all these strict things, which may totally not appeal to you. And I'm not recommending, that's not what I'm here to tell you. The sun ceremony, and it's a Native American ceremony where you're hung overnight, I think, by your skin for 24 hours. These types of very intense experiences. And these days, maybe people are going to do ayahuasca for a similar reason, although ayahuasca has this other psychotropic effect, but it's also a difficult journey. When you go through an experience like that with equanimity, you are expanding your equanimity muscle bigger and bigger. You're forcing yourself. See, if you're in extreme pain, and I have been at times, I've also been in, you might just be in pain in a 40-minute sit. If you decide, I'm not going to move for 40 minutes, I'm just not going to move. Some days that might be easy. And some days, 5 minutes in, your body's uncomfortable and wants to move. You know that you're not going to hurt yourself in 40 minutes, but the entire time you're struggling. That can be it's not actually dangerous, and yet it can be really difficult. And if you are able, that forces equanimity every moment to get through that. You have to be accepting every moment to get through that without moving, to get through that without giving in to your samskaras, to get through that with equanimity, clarity, concentration, acceptance. So you run a marathon, or you climb a mountain, or you do one of these ceremonies, or you go on retreat. Pain is part of every retreat for almost everybody. It doesn't have to be the main part, and I hope it's not the main part. It shouldn't necessarily be, but someday it will be. The fact is, we can definitely look a little bit askance at people who do these extreme things. Again, I'm not recommending them. But the truth is, for most of us, unless we die very suddenly, very quickly, and very easily, without very many human attachments, we're all going to go through periods of very intense difficulty. I just helped my stepfather go through hospice, and it was 4 months. I was there. And someone was very nice. There had to have been a lot of fear, even in the nice parts for him. And then there were very, very difficult physical times without any respite other than death. That's something like that's going to happen to most of us. We have to die at some point. And our body's going to fail us, or we're going to lose our loved ones. I'm not saying this to be pessimistic. This is part of life. This essential part of what Buddhism was saying is that we're going to lose the things we don't want to lose in this life. So the question is, do you want to be able to use that? Do you want to be having a kind of reward the whole time? Meditation, I'm using these extreme examples, but meditation, just sitting on your cushion today, 30 minutes, focused on your breath, is preparing you to be able to experience those things in a way that is purifying, in a way that is releasing pain rather than carrying it forward, in a way that is unwinding and healing, even all the way to the very end of our lives. And if we do difficult things now, or if we are conscious and awake through the difficult things that are going to happen in our life, then when we get to the end of our life, we'll be prepared. We'll have a taste of purification. We'll know what that tastes like. We'll know what it's like to have equanimity and acceptance through the most difficult things. We will know what it's like to be in love, even when in extreme pain. Okay, so the one last thing I think that needs to be added to this, just so people understand. I've been talking about equanimity and acceptance as the sort of primary element of the purification. I mean, it's really the concentration and the acceptance. It's the whole little process. And there is a kind of secondary thing that is of utmost importance that comes out of this. When we are really in equanimity, when we are really accepting in the present moment, we start to experience, we start to realize that everything is impermanent, that everything is flowing and changing. We start to flow. That's a way of putting it. This is a mistake some of us with mindfulness make. When we're practicing concentration, we start fixing things to concentrate on them in order to concentrate on them. Sometimes that's even part of the practice. I could focus on a red dot on a wall, say, and it's to still my concentration. But the experience of that, as you get more and more focused, is that you'll start to notice the vibratory, impermanent quality of even the most fixed object. You focus on your breath, it's constantly flowing. But as you notice that your reaction to the spoons, you'll notice it's vibratory, it's energetic, it wants to flow through you. And what keeps it from flowing? The samskaras, the knots, the blockages, the toxins, keep it from flowing. Shinsen, as an example of what we're really doing in purification, is heating up molasses, right? Molasses, if it's cold, will just be stiff, and you heat it up, it starts to flow. What we do with purification, what we do with equanimity and concentration, is we start to heat up our experience so we can start to see that we are a process. We are constantly vibrating and flowing. I say this because it's really essential to the practice of purification. You can't purify unless you're letting things flow through. I've already said this. The thing arises, you have equanimity, you let it go, but the flow itself starts to be the main thing you focus on. If you're having a pain now, but you see that as part of a flow, then you know it's already changing. So now we can start to see the knots untangle so they can flow. The muscles the knot gets rubbed out of the muscle so it can flow. The river the dams get unblocked so the river can flow through cleanly. If you pour a very dirty kind of water through a filter, it will go very slowly through the filter because it's got to take a while to get all this stuff out of it. The cleaner and cleaner you get, the more and more flow you will have. And this literally is the kind of flow that people talk about as a pleasant state of experience. But it's even simpler than that. It's just noticing moment by moment that everything is changing constantly. It's the opposite of what our samskaras say. When the spoon is dirty, what does your mind go? The spoon is dirty and it is dirty. It's not changing, first. Second, my partner never respects me. It's a fact that's always around. That's the kind of way that samskara wants to talk. I'm never safe. When we start to get into flow, we realize that's just not what's happening. This spoon is not the same as the dirty floor in my childhood apartment. Not the same thing at all. A completely different years of flow in between. And so when we sit in meditation and we practice acceptance and concentration, we start to tune into the flowing experience of life. And the more and more accepting we get, the more it flows, the more it heats up, the molasses heats up, and things can unwind. The river can flow and flow and flow, unwinding, 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 unwinding into freedom. Okay, so that is some of what the word purification means with respect to meditation. And it can be really useful to think of your meditative practice as purifying. And even before you taste that purification, just to think of it that way, so you know that even if you sit down and nothing seems to happen, if you had even a few moments of concentration or acceptance, purification was happening. And the more moments you can string together, the more purification is happening. And then eventually, as you aware this is what's happening, you'll get a taste of that. And then you can taste it as it's happening, and that will reward you for focusing more and for having more equanimity. And that will guide you into your more difficult experiences, because now you're ready for them. And now you will be able to sit with those experiences with equanimity. And because even though they are difficult, you will be tasting the reward in their release. So this is a useful concept to have at hand when thinking about your meditation practice. Much love to everybody, and I'll see you next week.